Hey everyone! Today I'm going to be giving my top tips for visiting factories and trade shows in Asia. In this video, I'm going to be covering questions like why even go and what's the purpose of these visits. The second one will be what's the strategy for navigating the trade show floor. The third topic will be about what to do when you're visiting the factories and what you should look for. And then the final one will be just general tips and ideas about how to travel around a country like China. So, number one, why even go on these trips out to Asia to visit these factories? Well, in my business, we have a hardware product where many of the components are off the shelf and sourced overseas, and so they're not made in the UK, and some of them aren't custom. So, we need to be in touch with these factories so that we know how to make things and what to do and what can be possible. So, when I go visit these trade shows and factories, I'm looking for what are the technology trends, what is possible in the industry, what are people making right now, what can be made and isn't being made, any opportunities for gaps in the market, but also ideas for things we can take on to our product and technology strategy. Right, so being at the trade show itself, the way I would describe it is basically instead of you having to visit every supplier all over the country, they all come to one place and you can go one by one quite easily and quickly. So it's a really efficient way of compacting many trips into one. They'll be arranged in a massive kind of grid on the trade show floor, broken down into categories depending on what industry or product type they're in. So you should study those maps, study where people should be, where different companies are, and make a plan for which ones are the ones you need to hit first. And the strategy that we usually employ is we find the topics that are most important and relevant to us, either it be components for a certain type of product or the type of kind of finished product article itself. And then first few days it will be just going along every supplier, visiting every stand, seeing what they do, understanding what they do, taking photos of their stand or business card, and then also their products. Anything that's interesting or of note, just be a massive combing process, and then write down these notes as you go along so you know what to refer back to. So that's like number one, and it would be basically hundreds to even maybe 1,000 different suppliers. You're just trying to get coverage at this point. The next kind of down selection on the funnel is the 20 or 30 or so conversations that you should have. That'll probably be towards the end of the show, maybe the last couple of days, or maybe even the evenings if you have the energy and time for it. So of these hundreds that you've found, who are the 20 that you need to have a dialogue with, that you're going to start opening the conversations about what you're trying to achieve, what can they do, and start to understand whether or not they are the right supplier for you. The next step is then the factory visits themselves. So that's probably going to be able to fit into 10 to 15 maximum. And it typically happens after the show. So the next couple of weeks afterwards, you should have them booked in for going around to each of these factories that you've down selected and then going to visit them in person. I'll talk a little bit about what to look for in those factory visits next. After that, you'll go down to maybe 5 or so factories who will be your chosen ones to make a sample with you. And then that will then filter down to maybe 2 or 3 suppliers who will be the final finished article, finished company. Never one, always 2 or more, because you always want to have a backup. Now, the topic of finding the right supplier. This is one of the hardest things in the whole process and one of the most difficult things in supply chain management and strategy. And there is countless examples and stories of this going wrong. Having the wrong partner, especially one that is key, like a contract manufacturer, can either grow your business really, really, really strongly or sink it entirely. So this is really, really important. I've got a few kind of key topics and questions that I like to assess, and that happens from the very first conversation to kind of continuous assessment throughout the relationship. So number one is technical qualification. Can they do what you need them to do? And the question you have to ask is not can they do it, but have they done it? If you ask, can you do this? Typically the answer is going to be yes, and a very confident yes, even if they can't, because they're willing to, punt your product in their ability to learn it, and you're going to be the kind of the first pancake. You don't never want to be the first pancake. So have you done this before? Show me examples. Let me see the products that you've done. Confirm that this is actually their product, because sometimes they just have samples of other factories and companies just to show it. So it's good to see the factory floor and see how that actual thing's being assembled there and then. And it's important at this stage to assess the quality of the product as well. And this is where a good engineering understanding or understanding of the product quality is important. If it's really technical, you have to do some testing and assessment. If it's visual or kind of how it's been assembled, then you can usually see that in your hand and feel it in your hand as well. But knowing what the quality of the product and what they're able to achieve is key at this point. The next requirement to cover is whether or not your businesses are a good match for each other. So what you're looking for here is a company that isn't too big or too small. And the typical kind of range that you're looking for is you want your business to be between 1 to 10% of their total supplier business. Any more than that, and they'll be very solely dependent on your success, and maybe there'll be issues of quality and supply because they can't keep up. And if your order books go up and down, they'll struggle to keep up with that. And then if they're too big for you, which is the opposite problem, they may not give you any attention. So when something goes wrong and you need them to fix something, they'll be like, oh, who are these guys? We don't really care too much. So there's a good Goldilocks amount. And the challenge with this is that both businesses will change over time. And so this is something to keep an eye on and assess throughout. The other one to think about is what is the kind of working relationship with this company? Is it a trading company that you're speaking to? Are you doing it through a trading partner? Are you speaking directly to them? Are there any other factories involved? And what are the supply terms there as well? Because there are ways in which that could be risky. And do they work with companies similar to you in a similar size in a similar industry as well? And getting those kind of reference points and checks is usually a good thing. You would always typically see big brands in their showroom, and sometimes those are just there from a long time ago. You can't really trust those. You kind of have to dig a little bit deeper to see who's working with them. A good reference point for whether or not a company is the right size for you is, does the boss sit with you for dinner? If he or she doesn't, then they're probably too big. If he or she does, then they think that you're important enough to engage with in business. And the final kind of key category is the reliability of the communication and the relationship itself. It's good to get good references from it. The best is someone who's worked with them before has recommended and is vouching for them. The worst is you've seen them on Alibaba and you've just engaged with them online. And everything between is the sliding scale. And there's a few other things to note when you're actually starting to do the order, which is things like the minimum order quantities, the sample pricing, the production pricing, turnaround time, lead time, payment terms, the English skills, the willingness to help you, the mold quality, the mold cost, and whether or not you own the mold, whether they own the mold. The list goes on and on. You can find loads of lists online, but the three key things that I covered at the very beginning are the most important. Right, and finally, I'm going to talk about some of the tips that I've learned and picked up whilst traveling around all over the country, visiting all these suppliers, because we made a lot of mistakes along the way. The first and most important one is to always take your passport everywhere you go. Don't leave it somewhere at the hotel, etc., because they typically need it to kind of sign in and validate your identity in places that sometimes you just think, oh, it's better to leave it in the hotel because it's safe, but no, take it with you all the time. Travel with overnight stuff everywhere. I didn't know where I would end up staying some nights. Sometimes I would get a call or make a new connection that I would need to go to the other side of the country or another city to fulfill that the meeting, and so I would then stay somewhere else. So basically take all overnight stuff with you. Ideally just always check in and check out of every hotel each night, but that's not practical sometimes if you're carrying a lot of things, tools or samples. Take photos of everything. Photos are just the golden standard way of communicating if you don't have technical packs and big data packs. And so I would always reference, oh, this photo from this supplier, it's a lot easier than trying to describe what you're trying to communicate. Have photos of everything for reference. Write your name on everything that is valuable to you. You don't know when you'll lose one of your bags. And you will wish that you had your name on the most important sample that you forgot in the hotel. So what I typically do is have a textile marker for all my bags and write it on the bottom, my name and contact details. And in every sample, I've got a big pad of labels with all my contact information on it. I just put it on anything that's important: my phone, my wallet, my passport. It's really got it on every sample that I get. Just things that if you lost it and couldn't get it back again, it's going to slow down your trip. If you're taking things on check-in bags, so carry-on bags and checked-in bags, split your samples and all your valuables between both, because you don't know what bag you may lose at any point. I have had one of my bags. Okay, I was flying to China. I had my bag full of all the important samples that I could possibly need for this entire trip. And I flew into Shenzhen, and my bag was lost for at least 4 days. So those 4 days, I just couldn't do anything because I was meant to take those samples to the supplier and say, "Can you make this? You know, what can we do with this, etc., etc." So they were my only tool of communicating, and it was all missing. And like, let's not even talk about like all the clothes and underwear I was missing as well. It was a pain in the ass. Always split your valuable things across multiple bags if you can, and then put names on everything so they can be found again. There's a lot of societal and cultural norms that you'll have to familiarize yourself with. One of my favorite ones that I had a faux pas on in China, the height of the cup usually dictates who's the more senior and who's the more junior in the kind of hierarchy of that relationship. And so I would be like cheersing the boss of the company and be like, "Hey, cheers, ganbei," and like thinking that looking in your eye was important because that's like a European thing. But no, that's not important. Just make sure that you've got the right height of the cup. I'm sure there's loads more that I keep messing up on, but you have to kind of clue yourself up a little bit on those. Or if not, just be ready to make a laugh of it and hope that they don't take you too seriously. And one more point on the kind of visiting around is to confirm absolutely everything. Confirm. Communication is the hardest thing that will trip you up time and time again. If you have a sample, or if you have a deadline, or if you have a payment, if you have a shipment of something, confirm it. Ask them to say the things back to you or email it back to you in an official way that when you read it, they understood what you've understood to be communicating. If you just, as soon as you assume something, then that's when mistakes will happen. And the kind of corollary to that is get tracking numbers for everything you possibly can. If something is expected to arrive somewhere, get the tracking link. That kind of confirms that something's on its way and you're able to track it yourself. And one bonus kind of tip, last but not least, remember to have fun in these trips. I sometimes forget to because it gets so kind of intense and addictive to just be doing all this crazy work, doing kind of CAD and designs in the back of a taxi between two suppliers. But there's also a whole country out there to experience and a culture to absorb yourself into. Definitely make some time if you can to see that side of the country that you're visiting to, and don't like kind of, if you absorb the culture and understand the people, that does actually help the supplier relationships. And maybe some of the best suppliers that I continue to have a relationship with, we would do things like hike up local mountains on the days off and just like spend time with each other outside of that. I'd go to barbecues with their family, and it was a lot more of like a natural personal relationship than it would be kind of professional. So yeah, make sure you spend some time outside of the factory, engaging with both the suppliers but also any locals in the culture too. So that concludes my tips for visiting factories and trade shows in China and Asia in general. It's a lot longer video than I was expecting. I think I had a lot more to say and I was just scratching the surface. I'll be honest, there's so much more like stories and challenges and issues of all the trips that I took so far and probably will continue to take. So yeah, that's definitely like a little bit of a coverage of everything, but I'll get into more in-depth tips and ideas in a future video. Thank you so much.